Δεν έφερε την εφημερίδα γιατί θέλω να σκοτώνω μύγες, αλλά κατά σύμπτωση, σήμερα το πρωί, με τη σημερινή, στην πρώτη σελίδα, η πρώτη σελίδα αναφέρεται στο θέμα που θέλω να θίξω απόψε. Washington on edge as Kurds flex their muscle. Oil export to Turkey stir fears of nationalist drive that could pull apart Iraq. Πώς αυτά έχουν να κάνουν με το θέμα μας. Αλλά πριν επιτρέψτε να πω κάτι άλλο. Ξέρετε όλοι, οι από εσάς, βλέπω τον φίλο στα μάτια, ο οποίος το ξέρει ασφαλώς, ότι την ιστορία του Χιώτη που πήγε στο Λονδίνο. Αυτά την εποχή που η κρατεά Αλβιών κυβερνούσε τα κύματα και εκτός αυτού βεβαίως χαρτογραφούσε όλες τις θάλασσες. Και ανεκάλυψε ότι ήταν τόσο προηγμένος αυτός ο τόπος, ιδίως σε σύγκριση με το μυροβόλο νησί από το οποίο ερχόταν, τόσο ανεπτυγμένος, τόσο εξελιγμένος, ώστε ακόμα και τα μικρά παιδιά μιλούσαν αγγλικά. Τόσα να ήταν και γκλεντζίντζαν, λέει. Καθώς επέστρεψε λοιπόν πίσω, είπε στο φίλο του το Σιδερή, του λέει: βρε Σιδερή, αυτά τα δικά μας, λέει, μάνα ψωμί, μάνα νερό, και εκείνο λέει εκεί τόσα θα είναι, τόσα να είναι τσιγκλεντζίντζαν. Θα μου επιτρέψετε λοιπόν σε αυτή την εποχή της διεθνοποίησης της επικοινωνίας να εγκλεντζίτσω κι εγώ και για χάρη των άλλων ακροατών που βρίσκονται μαζί μας. Το θέμα μου εντάσσεται μέσα στο γενικό θέμα της συνάντησης αυτής με τους όρους ακριβώς που ανακοινώνει το πρόγραμμα. Δηλαδή, να αναφερθούμε σε boundaries shift or disappear and hopes and anxieties collide. This is precisely what I will be talking about. And I will talk about it in connection with the people that I have come to know reasonably well, the Kurdish people, people that curiously, perhaps ambiguously, are not exactly central, but seem to be in the middle of everything. It's not quite the same thing. They have historically been astride, you can see above my head, astride a kind of barrier or a kind of border that has existed from time immemorial of two worlds. Because it seems that historically, almost always, whoever rules on the Bosphorus and whoever rules on the Iranian plateau seem to meet more or less on the Euphrates. You will remember from our own the Yenis that the horse of the Yenis drinks the whole Euphrates. It's not an accident. So whether it's Romans and Parthians, whether it is Byzantines and Sassanids, whether it is Ottomans and Safavid Persians, there seems to be a kind of geopolitical logic that makes these powers meet right about the Euphrates. And the Kurds live astride and between and inside these things. And that's where they find space for themselves. Now, this gives you an idea of how they do this. This is the principalities, without including all the various nomads of the Kurdish people that existed in the early 19th century. In the interstices at this birth, they all had just a vague allegiance, either to the Ottoman court or to the Persian court, and they had a very large degree of autonomy. You might call it, to put it in Greek terms, like an enormous multiple mani, because it was the sort of place that was so mountainous, so poor, and so difficult that the Central Powers did not think it was worth their while to actually subjugate it. But they could play the various conflicts between them and create a very high degree of autonomy so that they had each one, as it were, the equivalent of a Petrombes. This changed very much when the Ottoman Empire, with its capacity to include peoples of various cultural capacities, the transnational empire collapsed and was replaced by nation states. And in particular the Turkish nation state, which in its orthodoxy, in the Kemalist strength of creating a single people on, shall we say, the French model as received in the East as we understand it, created a kind of very strong desire to make sure that unity and cultural assimilation was part of it. That made this kind of autonomy extremely difficult. In both the administrative centralization, taxation, raising troops, and also the linguistic and cultural pressure created a great deal of difficulty for maintaining autonomy, and it was this kind of high demands on the assimilatory needs of the country that have, along with the neglect in terms of the underdevelopment of southeastern Turkey, that has led to the great resistance that we find, which has taken violent forms and indeed has reached even terrorist forms. Now, the area that I showed you before was transformed by World War I. In the succession of the Ottoman Empire, the arrangements between completely alien people, namely especially the French and the English, transformed. This is a Sykes-Picot agreement called after the two civil servants who made the arrangement. That part of the world was divided, and the traditional, if I may say, mixture of Turco-Persian contact was split apart by the creation of two main pillars along with certain secondary countries, namely the pillar of French Syria and English Iraq, both of which became countries in their own right in the course of events. This is the map as we know it now, and this is the map that is now the borders that are now changing, evoking both fears and hopes. So what undid all this? And it is being undone, let us face it, the two things. Iraq was undone by the American intervention, and even more so by the so-called American Reconstruction, which has been an absolute disaster, whatever one thinks of the intervention. And the second one, Syria, I'm simplifying of course, has been ruined by what, shall we say, high-hoping journalists have named the Arab Spring. Iraq is being dissolved. It is barely holding together. I'm giving you here a view of the actual religious and ethnic division of Iraq. In the south, what you see in pale blue, you have the original strong Shia Arab population that is the backbone of old Mesopotamia, the old vilayet of Baghdad and Basra, on which the British imposed a Sunni king to whom they had obligations. He was, as it were, illegitimate in the eyes of the Baghdadis from the word go. The yellow reflects the Sunni Arabs, who, in order to keep down the Shia population, have in fact had the upper hand, either through a Sunni king, as I said before, or through a series of Sunni dictators that succeeded each other. And finally, what is in pink are the Kurdish, who are mostly Sunni, but above all they are Kurds and something different. They are not Arab. They are people that speaks a Persian dialect and have a different consciousness and a different story. They live astride, as you saw before, the old limit. So, in effect, what you have is that the Shia, who have now the upper hand, will resent the fact that they have been dominated over for so long by the Sunni. The Sunni, in turn, have the habit of being the lords, and they resent being pushed aside. So the things are falling apart. The Kurds, on the other hand, have had the extraordinary capacity, taking advantage of the no-fly zone in the beginning, to develop an independent and autonomous state which functions, which is actually secure and is productive and has ministries that actually work. Well, work at least as well as those in Athens do. But it is an extraordinary phenomenon in the region. But it is extraordinarily difficult to keep these peoples together, except for the will. You saw Washington is worried because there is this theory that large countries are easier to maintain and that they somehow guaranteed stability. I have my doubts. When it comes to Syria, before we come to Syria, this Kurdistan has created an extremely important link with Turkey. Turkey is extraordinarily present to it. The Turks were suspicious in the beginning of an autonomous Kurdistan because they thought it might cause a desire on the part of their own Turks, by example, of seeking their own independence. They found, on the contrary, that the capacity of mediation that was given by having an institutional interlocutor to keep their own Kurds in peace was very important. They found that it was a huge market because, in fact, the Anatolian Tigers, that are these non-Kemalist people who are also the main supporter of the AK party, who are religious, yes, but above all, they like markets, have been extremely active, and there were more than $12 billion of trade going across that border in this year alone. There is nothing in Kurdistan that is not Turkish, from curtains to fruit to buildings to cement to transport, you name it. It is an extraordinary example of cooperation, both in terms of trade and in terms of politics. It is, as it were, an example of the best that you could expect of the proclaimed policy of Foreign Minister Davutoglu, namely no problems abroad and strategic depth. Does that really work? Well, in that case, it seems to. But it is an exception. My point tonight is, in fact, that it is going the other way, that policy has, in fact, failed. The policy that is combined with a desire of autonomy, or rather of hegemony, on the part of a Turkey headed by a leader who is extremely capable, but also extremely ambitious, who has been in power for 10 years, and it's gone a bit to his head, and has reversed so many of the old Kemalist policies, namely the containing the measured foreign policy and the turning one's back to the Arab world. This desire to be hegemonic in the Arab world, opening both to seeking Islamic leadership, has in fact backfired, and the place where it backfired the worst has been Syria. Now, Syria is itself a very complicated country. Here you see just one of the various indications of it is split up. Pan-Arabism was the way in which, the ideological way in which the differences were papered over. Pan-Arabism, claiming a little bit the glory of the old capital of Damascus, was the way in which the language and religious differences of what used to be the French-constructed Syrian province was held together. It is interesting that Pan-Arabism was created by Christian intellectuals, and it also served the purposes of the elites, both the landowning elites and the merchant elites, to accommodate them to this new arrangement. The logic of Pan-Arabism, of course, means that it could not be limited to one Arab country. And so, ideologues being ideologues, they joined with Egypt, which in effect means that they were subject to Nasser's Egypt for a while. It was a disaster. It was a complete fiasco. And in reaction to that, once the two countries were separated, what you had was that the Ba'athi, shall we say, the more left-wing, the more radical part of the nationalist movement fell into the hands of the army, and the army in turn fell into the hands of a sect that was marginal, the Alawites, which most Muslims don't even recognize as Mohammedan, who live mostly in the corner up by Latakia, up in the northwestern corner of Syria, and whose chiefs are first Papa Hafez al-Assad, and now, of course, Bashar al-Assad, who not only represented the possibility of keeping the peace, of keeping the vested interests intact at the price of very heavy-handed policy, but were also ruthless, Papa, and now, as we see, son, ruthless in their repression when they were against it. Now, there was a window of opportunity perhaps at the very beginning of the Syrian crisis, in which Turkey, in its aspirations of hegemony, might have intervened and created a Pax Turkica and actually cashed in its claim of leadership in the region. But it did not act. It did not act partly because it did not get NATO and United States support. The United States is tired of wars in which it has spent huge fortunes and in both blood and treasure, and therefore did not act, but also for internal reasons. And the internal reasons are also very, very pertinent. One had to do with the fear of the Prime Minister of of having an adventure that misfired. And since he wanted to become President of the Republic with augmented powers, it was something he could not afford to do. But beyond the personal thing, the logic of his own transformation, one of his triumphs, one of the most successful things of the AK policy, namely the being able to push back the deep state, in particular the military, that always had a privileged position in Kemalist Turkey, meant that this military, these cadres, were alienated. And when you want to have a forceful policy, the first thing you want is competent and loyal military officers, and those he could not call upon. Furthermore, Turkey has one weak point in this extraordinary booming economy, and that is a dependency on energy. It is dependent on affordable energy from Russia and Iran, neither of whom are particularly friendly to it. Therefore, but they are friendly to the Syrian regime. So there's a number of things that come together to make this impossible. The upshot is a Syria that is divided. The moderate Syrian opposition was discredited because it was proven that it could not bring in the support and the power that was necessary in order to overthrow Bashar, instead of which what you have is a number of militias and very, very cruel troops, or troops capable of great cruelty, running the so-called opposition, so that sensible people, sensible, peace-loving people are happier with the devil they know, they're happier with a monster like Bashar, and are not likely to support those who, and you have the usual tyranny that happens, you know, when even your own people come in and say, you're not radical enough, you're a traitor to the cause, why don't you take up arms? It's a phenomenon that we know even here from our own civil war, the way in which people can be bullied into having to be more extreme that they're having it. So the upshot, I think, is that Syria will also end up as being two zones, to the extent that the foreign intervention can be held in check. And it can be held in check by limiting, because what these groups that are fighting are, in fact, a whole number of fifth columns. Everybody has his own special. Yeah, the Iranians do, the Saudis do, the Saudis, and the policy, the Russians do. Everybody does. Everybody has his little favorite. When the financing stops and the arming stops, then it is possible to arrive to an agreement. But the agreement is not going to be Bashar in The Hague and a wonderful democracy like Denmark spreading out in Syria. What is more likely to happen is that there will be at least de facto separations of the regions as they are. So, does this mean that, that this is the great opportunity for the united Kurdistan? It is true that I have never met a Kurd who did not passionately want his country to be one, unified and independent. It is also true that the chances have never been so great, that the stars are really aligned in favor of such a unification. Yeah? The vacuum of power, or the conflict between the two powers, because Iran, of course, is present all the way to the Mediterranean through its clients, and Turkey, again, is very influential in other directions. But the truth is that that against these two positive things, a number of things can argue. First of all, Turkey, that has not been able to fight down its Kurds, is compelled to make concessions in terms of cultural rights and political rights. These rights are painful. These are painful because they go in the teeth of this Kemalist orthodoxy of the one people, indivisible, that is a nationalist Turkish country. It was necessary on the one hand, but it runs against the grain of the very cement, the very ideological cement of the Turkish Republic. So it is a difficult thing to do. The second thing is that the only core, the Piedmont, the Piemonte of Kurdistan can only be the Kurdistan independent region, autonomous region. But the Kurds in Turkey are both many more than those in Iraqi Kurdistan, and also have their own pride in having been those who have fought so bitterly, in fact, more bitterly than anyone would like, to overcome, and they are not about to yield the speaker role to the Kurdish quasi-state in Iraq. The upshot is that we really don't know. The other thing is that it's also still too early to leave for the Kurds in Iraq, the Iraqi Kurds, because they have huge material interest in the remaining part of quasi-united Iraq, in that they receive 17% of all the oil income that comes from there. What does that tell us? It tells us that the borders are obsolete, but it also tells us that there's an enormous amount of residual hanging on to them. So there are unpredictable things, uncharted seas, and I think that unlike much of the confidence with which uncharted seas have been seen in these conversations that we have had, where everybody thought that uncharted seas were an invitation for joyful adventure, I think it also is a great danger of shipwrecks on any number of counts, and that this may take the form, if we're lucky, of informal arrangements that are practical, coalitions, arrangements, smuggling. Smuggling is a wonderful thing. And other informal, but it'll be very difficult to have recognized, internationally recognized countries and borders shaken from one day to the next. But thank you very much.